The John Manley Cave Diving Tragedy. On September 28, 2008, something terrible happened in the cave in France. 3 brave divers went into the cold, dark waters of the source of the Volanthen cave. They were John Manley, John Volanthen, and Charles Reed Henry. These men loved adventure, but they didn't know the danger waiting for them underwater. This is the story of John Manley's last dive. John Manley was born in 1976. He was a man who enjoyed riding motorcycles and diving deep underwater. John was always looking for his next big adventure. When John was younger, he loved the thrill of motorcycle riding. The wind on his face made him feel alive. But John had another passion too, scuba diving. He loved exploring the quiet world under the sea. John joined a diving club called the British Sub-Aqua Club in Britain. Here he learned how to dive better and use his special diving equipment. He became really good at using rebreather. This machine helped him stay underwater for a long time. But John's life changed when he had a bad motorcycle accident. He hurt his back badly. This injury made it hard for him to do things, but John didn't give up. He was determined to keep exploring. Even with his back injury, John decided to try cave diving. Cave diving is very dangerous. You have to swim through tight spaces in dark caves underwater. It's not for people who get scared easily. John knew cave diving was risky, especially with his bad back, but he couldn't resist the excitement of exploring places few people had seen before. The cave where John went diving was called the Source du Volanthen. It's in France, and it's known to be very dangerous. Many brave divers had explored it before. Some of them never came back. This cave has clear water that can fool you. It looks safe, but it's not. Inside there are narrow passages that suddenly open into big rooms. Then they get small again. It's easy to get lost or stuck. John Volanthen, a famous cave diver, had explored this cave before. He even set a world record there. John Manley and his friends knew all about the cave dive. John Manley and his friends knew all about the cave's dangers, but they still wanted to explore it. They thought that they were ready for the challenge. On the morning of their dive, John Manley and John Volanthen and Charles Reed Henry got their gear ready. They were excited, but also a bit nervous. They knew this wasn't going to be an easy dive. John Manley had a big piece of equipment called the rebreather. It helps divers breathe underwater for a long time, but it's also big and can be hard to move around in tight spaces. His friends were worried. They told John, "Your rebreather is too big for some of the narrow parts of the cave, and with your bad back, it's going to be hard." But John didn't want to change his mind. He said, "I've been in tight spots before. I can handle it. We've trained for this. I'm not going to let anyone stop me. I'm not going to let anything stop me." His friends knew John was stubborn. They admired his bravery, but they were also worried about his safety. As they put on their diving suits and checked their air tanks one last time, they all felt determined. They were about to go on a journey that would test everything they knew about diving. The 3 friends stepped into the cold water of the cave. At first it was easy. They could swim side by side, but as they went deeper, the passages got narrower. John Manley was in the lead. His big rebreather made it hard for him to move in the tight spaces. Sometimes he had to twist his body in weird ways to fit through. His back was hurting, but he tried to ignore the pain. His friends John and Charles stayed close to him. They watched carefully to make sure that John was okay. They could only see what their flashlights showed them. The rest was dark and mysterious. As they went deeper, the passages got so narrow that John had to take off his rebreather to squeeze through. This was dangerous, but it was the only way to keep going. His friends helped him, passing the equipment back and forth. You could see on John's face that he was struggling. He looked focused, but also in pain. The deeper they went, the tighter the cave seemed to get. In some places, they could feel the rough walls of the cave on their shoulders. The water was very cold, and it made their bodies feel stiff. John was having trouble breathing. Each breath was a struggle against his own body and the tight space around him. Despite how hard it was, they kept going. They were excited to see parts of the cave that few people had ever seen, but they also knew that the further they went, the more dangerous it became. When they reached the hardest part of the dive, with the narrowest passages, they stopped for a moment. John looked at his friends without saying anything. They all agreed to keep going. They trusted each other and shared a love for adventure. Together they swam into the deepest part of the cave, ready to face whatever they found. But as they went deeper, things got even harder. The passages were so tight that John was really struggling with his big rebreather. He had to squeeze through gaps that were barely big enough for him. Then they came to a part of the cave that was so narrow that John couldn't fit through with his rebreather on. He made a big decision. He decided to take it off. This was very risky. The rebreather was what helped him breathe underwater for a long time. Without it, he only had the air in his backup tank. This meant that he had less time to stay underwater. John's friends helped him take off the rebreather. Then John tried to get through the tight space with just his backup air tank. It was really hard for John. His back was hurting a lot, and it was hard to move in the tight space. But he kept going. His friends encouraged him, and they all worked together as a team. As they kept swimming, something terrible happened. John's air tank suddenly came loose. Without his rebreather, and now without his air tank, John had no way to breathe underwater. John started to panic. He tried to grab his air tank, but it was hard in the dark, tight cave. His friends John and Charles rushed to help him, and they tried to put the air tank back on. But it was very difficult in such a small space. As the minutes passed, John was running out of air. He started to have trouble thinking clearly because his brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. This is called hypoxia, and it's very dangerous. John's friends watched helplessly as he struggled. They tried their best to help, but they couldn't fix the problem fast enough. In those scary moments deep in the dark cave, John Manley faced the biggest challenge of his life. His body and mind were pushed to their limits. He had always loved adventure and taking risks, but now he was in real danger. Sadly, John couldn't hold on any longer. The lack of oxygen was too much for his body to handle in the cold, dark water, far from the surface. John Manley's adventure came to a tragic end. His friends John and Charles were heartbroken. They had started this dive full of excitement, ready for an adventure, and now they had lost their friend in the depths of the cave. When John and Charles finally made it back to the surface, they were filled with sadness and fear. They knew that they had to help right away and try to save John. They quickly told the local authorities and emergency services what had happened. They explained where John was in the cave and what had gone wrong. A rescue team came quickly. They were expert divers who knew how to handle emergencies in caves. John and Charles told them everything that they knew about the cave and where John was. The rescue team went into the cave, hoping to find John alive. But the cave was just as dangerous for them as it had been for John and his friends. They had to be very careful as they searched. Sadly, when the rescue team reached the place where John was last seen, they found that it was too late. They found John's body in the dark water. The rescue team carefully brought John's body back to the cave. It was a sad and difficult journey. John and Charles saw the rescue team come out of the water with their friend. They were devastated. The exciting adventure they had planned had ended up in tragedy. In the days after the accident, many people in the diving community were very sad. They all knew how dangerous cave diving could be, but it was still shocking to lose someone like this. John's family and friends got together to remember him. They talked about all the good times they had with John, all the adventures he'd been on, and how much he loved diving. John's story became a reminder to all divers about how dangerous cave diving can be. It showed how important it is to be careful and respect the power of nature, even when you're doing something you love. John Manley's tragic story reminded of the fine line between adventure and danger. John's passion for cave diving led him to push his limits, but it ultimately cost him his life. What if John had listened to his friends' concerns about his rebreather, or if he had chosen a less challenging cave given his back injury? Perhaps a different decision could have changed everything. This story serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of safety in extreme sports. It shows us that even experienced divers need to respect nature's power and know their own limits. If you found John's story compelling and want to hear more tales of adventure, triumph, and tragedy, please consider subscribing to our channel. Just click the subscribe button below. Please consider subscribing to our channel. Just click the subscribe button below. If you're fascinated by stories like John's, don't miss our next video. Another Griplin tale awaits us, and you won't want to miss it. Thank you.